those of you from my generation who are confused, no, Miles Davis didn't write that. We know who wrote it. Matter of fact, Sarah and I watched a live concert of Cyndi Lauper a week ago called Live at Last. It was recorded in 2004 when she was 50. And that prompted my Facebook post. Back in the 80s, we had no idea how talented Cyndi Lauper is. We sort of thought of her as not Madonna, the other one besides Madonna, who dressed weird. She went on to write Kinky Boots. She's 70 and she's still going. It's not, she's barely retired. She kept going her whole life. So anyway, but Miles Davis did record that. I was in Germany on a tour of students from the North Carolina School of the Arts. I was lucky enough to be selected as the pianist for a group of students that they took every year in what's called the International Music Program. And my year was the first that they included a jazz group. And so I was hanging around with the jazz people, and the trumpet player said, "My God, Miles Davis has lost his mind. He's recording like time after time by Cyndi Lauper." And I think he played it on his final concert in 1991, along with Human Nature by Michael Jackson. So anyway, 2 songs by the same title today. An aged man remembers April by Raymond P. Fisher. Do I remember April? Yes and no, depending on the meaning of remember. It marks a season, and it still comes on between the chill of March and warmth of May. If that's remembering, perhaps I do. And now for my favorite scene in all of Star Wars.
Did I pray just duo. Yes, duo to begin the training.
But I've learned so much.
Please finish what he begins.
I won't fail you. I'm not afraid.
You will be. You will be.
I love the final words. I love the fact that his ears perk up before he says them. I love that he leans forward before he repeats them. I love that they're all monosyllables. I love that he changes his voice before the second one, and I just love the way he speaks them. But that's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about these words.
A Jedi must have the deepest commitment, the most serious mind. This one in a long time have I watched. All his life he has looked away, to the future, to the horizon. Never his mind on where he was, what he was doing.
Here are some similar words. The feeling that any task is a nuisance will disappear soon if it is done in mindfulness. Thich Nhat Hanh. If you are depressed, you are living in the past. If you are anxious, you are living in the future. If you are at peace, you are living in the present. Lao Tzu. What day is it? Asked Pooh. It's today, squeaked Piglet. My favorite day, said Pooh. A.A. Milne. And when they played, they really played. And when they worked, they really worked. Dr. Seuss. I never wanted to give this talk. It's not about justice or truth or love. In fact, it has nothing to do with religion at all. And I can't tie it to even one of the principles. And yet, one of my favorite talks I ever heard in this room was about gorillas. Some of you may remember. I still remember the celebrant saying, if there's one thing any Wacoan can agree on, no matter who they are, it's the excellence of our zoo. I felt an immediate thrill at those words and how everyone instantly knew what he meant. I take truth wherever I find it. And I'd like to talk about something that at least two people in this room have mentioned as something that challenges or frustrates them. And after hearing that, I immediately thought, I can help them with that, or at least offer some food for thought. And the problem is getting shit done. Being overwhelmed by a to-do list, or several to-do lists, feeling constantly behind. Before I begin, I'd like to state that I do not give this talk from any position of superiority or with the claim that I never worry about anything. And none of this information is original with me. Much better minds than mine came up with everything I'm about to tell you. The first of these minds belongs to a man named Jay Harrington. A former practicing lawyer, he now dispenses advice to other lawyers on LinkedIn on how to build a legal practice. And perhaps his main piece of advice revolves around two words. The words around which this talk is based. It really originally was not conceived to just have to do with time in general. It morphed into that. The two words are context switching. The term context switching is borrowed from computer language, where it means the process of a computer storing the state of one process so that it can return to it later. This is what allows us to switch from one app or program to another. For our purposes today, context switching means shifting from one task to another unrelated task. I'll qualify that a little bit and go off script. More specifically, it means shifting from an important task that will take some time and requires concentration to a less important one that's more of a distraction and back. When you go back, you have to think, now where was I? That where was I moment wastes time. Working on one thing, then getting an email and immediately answering it, then returning to the first thing. This is especially true if the first thing is what you actually do or are trying to do. This is called deep work. Work that requires your concentration, your focus, and will take some time and is really the substance of what you do or doing at that moment. For me, deep work is translating a text. For Sarah, by far, according to her, it's lesson planning, grading papers to a secondary extent, but mainly lesson planning. In her words, the deepest work she does for sure. And deep work takes concentration and focus. In fact, in 10 years, the moment when I realized I would do better work if I set aside specific times only to translate, ignoring everything else, was the single biggest moment of progress I've ever made. What are our distractions? For me, it's email and iPhone notifications. For Sarah, people coming into her classroom for a variety of reasons. Google the phrase context switching sometime. You'll get a lot of hits. Context switching is killing your productivity. 5 diagrams that show how context switching saps your productivity. Meet context switching, the #1 productivity killer in the workplace. These were the top 3 in order. I once worked for JCPenney, and we were in the break room, and a commercial came on promising, and I quote, "Buy one, get one free. Buy one, get one free. Buy one, get one free." And the shoe manager said, "So if you buy one, what do you get?" So in that vein, what does context switching kill? Productivity. According to a joint report by Catalog, spelled with a Q, I haven't delved into that, and Cornell University's Idea Lab, on average, people take 9.5 minutes to get back into a productive workflow after switching between digital apps. 45% of people say context switching makes them less productive. 43% of people say switching between tasks causes fatigue, and I will add anxiety. A lot of people in business contexts have said. I want to say something here about multitasking, the concept of multitasking, which isn't really a thing. We kind of talk about it, but really you can't do more than one task at a time. What you can do is switch back and forth really quickly between a number of tasks. There's a place for a kind of multitasking or starting one task before another is finished, such as putting a chicken in the oven, then making a salad while the chicken is roasted. But those are still related tasks. They're working toward the same goal, which is dinner, and you're doing them one at a time. And this is an important distinction. There's a word for this that I found and lost. You're saying, now I'm finished with this task, and I'm going to move on to a new one, and change my expectations, approach, mindset, etc. Or as Emeril Lagasse used to say, move from chicken land to salad land. You have all your salad stuff over here, you have all your chicken stuff over here. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite quotes, and I should probably put this later in the talk, is never do anything in the kitchen without knowing what you're going to do next. However, I think I lost some of the changes I made yesterday. However, that's different from rubbing butter into the chicken, half of it. Then washing your hands, making a salad, and coming back and rubbing the butter into the other half. That's different. Which brings me to the second half of my talk. I did lose all this stuff yesterday, but I still know what I'm going to say. This talk is very different from my other ones, and it's not going to be a written out. I'm not going to impress you with my writing skills as much, but just kind of say some information, bring you the second half of my talk. It's really helpful in dealing with a to-do list, not to think of it as primarily a to-do list, but as a schedule. If you schedule blocks of time as your primary focus, you can have a list of things over here that you can plug into those slots rather than a never-ending series of things that you'll never do. That's just a different way to look at it. And it keeps you focused on one thing at a time when it's appropriate. You know, for example, I'm just sort of riffing here a little bit. Certain tasks, for me, are better done at certain times of day. I typically like to start my day after Sarah leaves at 7 a.m. With time on LinkedIn, which for me is very important because I work totally online. At 8 o'clock or thereabouts, I might do some marketing or networking and keep up with some of the people that are giving me work, that kind of thing. 9 o'clock, and I've had a cup of coffee at this point, I start actually translating. But I don't do anything else after I start that, you know, unless I get an email for a job or something that I have to take. Same with Sarah. If someone walks into a room that's the principal, you know, that's different than a student just coming in, hanging out. As a matter of fact, even within my translating process, and you can, you know, convert this to whatever you'd like, whatever kind of work you'd like to do, whether that's professional or not. Even within my translating process, I can separate that into 4 stages. And these are not original with me. They're by Betty S. Flowers, Professor of English and Director of the Lyndon B. Johnson Presidential Library at UT Austin. And I'm going to read the whole thing because it's really instructive and it's not that long. What's the hardest part of writing? I asked on the first day of class. Getting started, someone offers, groaning. No, it's not getting started, a voice in the back of the room corrects. It's keeping on once you do get started. I can always write a sentence or two, but then I get stuck. Why? I asked, I being the professor. I don't know. I'm writing along and all of a sudden I realize how awful it is and I tear it up. Then I start over again. And after 2 sentences, the same thing happens. Let me suggest something which might help by saying, turning to the board, I write 4 words. Madman, architect, carpenter, judge. Then I explain. What happens when you get stuck is that 2 competing energies are locked horn to horn, pushing against each other. One is the energy of what I'll call your madman. He is full of ideas, writes crazily, and perhaps rather sloppily, gets carried away by enthusiasm or anger, and if really let loose, could turn out 10 pages an hour. The second is a kind of critical energy, what I'll call the judge. He's been educated and knows a sentence fragment when he sees one. He peers over your shoulder and says, "That's trash," with such authority that the madman loses his crazy confidence and shrivels up. You know the judge is right. After all, he speaks with the voice of your most imperious English teacher. I love this line, but for all his sharpness of eye, he can't create anything. So you're stuck. Every time your madman starts to write, your judge pounces on him. Of course, this is to over-dramatize the writing process, but not entirely. Writing is so complex, involves so many skills of heart, mind, and eye, that sitting down to a fresh sheet of paper can sometimes seem like the hardest work among those not impossible, as Yeats put it. Whatever joy there is in the writing process can come only when the energies are flowing freely, when you're not stuck. And the trick to not getting stuck involves separating the energies. If you let the judge, with his intimidating carping, come too close to the madman and his playful creative energies, the ideas which form the basis for your writing will never have a chance to surface. But you can't simply throw out the judge. The subjective personal outpourings of your madman must be balanced by the objective impersonal vision of the educated critic within you. Writing is not just self-expression, it is communication as well. So start by promising your judge that you'll get around to asking his opinion, but not now. Remember those two words. And then let the madman energy flow. Find what interests you in the topic, the question or emotion that it raises in you, and respond as you might to a friend or an enemy. Talk on paper, page after page, and don't stop to judge or correct sentences. Then, after a set amount of time, perhaps, stop and gather the paper up and wait a day. The next morning, ask your architect to enter. She will read the wild scribblings saved from the night before and pick out maybe a tenth of the jottings as relevant or interesting. You can see immediately that the architect is not sentimental about what the madman wrote. She is not going to save every crumb for posterity. That's called killing your darlings, and it's sometimes incorrectly attributed to Dorothy Parker, but it's actually said by a much lesser known author from Britain, whose name I can't remember, Murder Your Darling, something that's your thing, your pet thing that you always go to, kill it. It's the same thing with a singer. If a singer does this in every song, what we used to call action figure Barbie, get rid of it. You're doing it every time and it means nothing. So she's not going to save all of that. She's going to get rid of most of it. Her job, the architect, is to simply select large chunks of material and arrange them in a pattern that might form an argument. The thinking here is large organizational, paragraph-level thinking. The architect doesn't worry about sentence structure. No, the sentence structure is left for the carpenter, who enters after the essay has been hewn into large chunks of related ideas. The carpenter nails these ideas together in a logical sequence, making sure each sentence is clearly written, contributes to the argument of the paragraph, and leads logically and gracefully to the next sentence. When the carpenter finishes, the essay should be smooth and watertight. Then the judge comes around to inspect punctuation, spelling, grammar, tone, all the details which result in a polished essay become important only in this last stage. These details are not the concern of the madman who's come up with them, or the architect who's organized them, or the carpenter who's nailed the ideas together sentence by sentence. Save details for the judge. I have a similar sequence when I translate, although I don't create original content. My first stage, when I choose to use these 4 stages, I don't every time, but sometimes when I do, the first stage is typing. Around a third of the total time I will spend translating a text. I look at the German text, and there's a blank square of equal size next to it in this technology we use, and I just type like crazy. I look at it and I type as I'm reading. If I come to a word I don't know, or something I have to look up later, I put 3 question marks. Second stage, I look up words. I search for all the question marks in a row. Third stage, I correct typos. That one's an easy one. Fourth one is side-by-side comparison. For me, this is crucial, and it's the single biggest disadvantage of translating this way, because most of my mistakes come from things that I missed in the source text and mistranslated. Not because I didn't understand it or know it, but because just stupid things like, is not required to pay, is required to pay. Big difference, but easy to miss, so I have to make sure that I get all that. Last stage is I edit and rewrite. A couple of advantages to this. The final stages are the ones that require thinking and concentration. But by that point, all the first 3 or 4 are finished. Looking up terms is mindless. I don't have to make any judgments. I just have to look them up and write them in. Very little judgment. So I save it for last, because at that point, a lot of the work has been done. And so I'm ahead of the game. When I was getting my doctorate, in piano performance in my former life. My professor at UT Austin, mentioned once that he likes to work on pieces in different stages of development at the same time. You know, work on something that he's just learning and something that he's known for a long time and things in between. Because working on something that you know really well, preparing it for a performance is exhausting. It really is. If you're preparing for a full-length piano recital, it's like being a bodybuilder and maintaining that ripped look. You can't do it for very long. You can't keep it up for that much time because it just requires so much time in the day to keep revisiting it if it's within the next couple of weeks. The director of the Southern Gateway Chorus in Cincinnati, did you all know I used to sing barbershop quartet music? In several choruses. I was in the 4th place winning chorus of 1990, I think. It was in Cincinnati. Southern Gateway, because right next to it is Kentucky, right below. Our director of that course used to talk about the beginning stage in which you're learning notes, not fun. The middle stage is when you're trying to add interpretive ideas. Play with stuff, see if this works, see what you like, and that's fun. Final stage is what he called putting on the shellac, also not fun. And each stage requires different skills. I used to play chess, and we talked about an opening, and a middle game, and the end game. The middle game is where most games are won and lost. And each part of those games requires different skills, so that once you've hit the middle game, you might get up and walk around while the other person's moving and regroup. Walt Disney World actually assigns its cast members different jobs, rotating on several hours at a time, so they don't stand there all day, pushing one button or doing something like that. Can you switch to the Pomodoro? There's something called the Pomodoro technique that I came across that I wanted to mention. Another talk that I saw that was really interesting was a woman working with singers who had been the coach for Australia's Olympic rowing team. So she was from the sports background. And she said that optimally, you learn the most at the beginning and the end of every practice session, which for a musician or an athlete is the deep work. And so the more of them you have, the better. She actually advised us, and she's the only person in my life other to do so as a musician. Practice 15 minutes at a time, if you can, if you have that option. We don't always, but if you can, you'll get a lot more done in 4 sessions of 15 minutes than 1 of an hour. So step 1, create a list of tasks ordered by importance. Set a timer for 25 minutes. Work on a task with that duration of that timer. Take a 5-minute break. After 4 Pomodoros, take a 15 to 30-minute break. So separating your time into chunks like that. What causes anxiety, and there are some things that are really beyond my remit and scope to talk about. What causes anxiety, speak for myself, is often thinking of too many things at once. As in, oh my God, I have to do all this work, and the condo is a mess, and I have to go shopping, and when am I going to dust, and when are we going to go exercise, and It's actually not true, but it's probably relatable. I don't actually think so much about a messy condo. It doesn't bother me or Sarah that much. But I do worry about money. I worry about money a lot, and I have for 30 years. If I don't get a job, if I don't get work for 2 days, 3 days a week, horrible anxiety, horrible depression. I think, oh my God, I'm a failure at this job, just like I was a failure at my last job, and my life's going to be, and it just spirals. We need a paradigm shift. Move from a to-do list to a schedule. Move from Piglet, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, to Phineas and Ferb. What are we going to do today? A schedule is self-contained, one task at a time, and it gives you the freedom to say, to put into Lord of the Rings terms. I will clean the refrigerator someday, but that is not this day. Those two words, not now, have been one of the most important things I've kind of come up with maybe since I hit my 40s and 50s. I'll do this stuff, but I'm not going to do it right now. I'll do it later. I don't know when I'll do it, but when it's time for it, I'll do it. Stuff like dusting and vacuuming and stuff. You know, if I got people coming over, that's the time. Or if I have to register our car, I have no choice. So there's different kinds of things. We will always have shit to do, a lot of it, and we have to choose. According to my dean when I was an undergrad, he once said this to us: you have to choose from what we have to do, what we should do, and what we want to do. In fact, one of our U.S. presidents has left behind a method for making that decision that bears his name, the Eisenhower technique. This is a little grid of tasks that are urgent and not urgent, and things that you can delegate or just not do. If you have the option, and this is a whole thing. I've known a number of people with very good intentions were convinced that no one else on their committee was competent but them, and so they had to do everything because no one else could do it right, and their lives are miserable. If you can delegate, that's one of Jay Harrington's advice to lawyers that are building careers. Learn to say, okay, let me give this task to someone else who could do it, rather than me doing everything. That's the delegate. So, is this task important and is it urgent? Well, then do it. You know, Sarah's lesson plans that are due on, for a lesson she has to teach the next day or coming up, a deadline for my translating, whatever that is, not urgent. Schedule it. I had a gig that I had to do, I still refer to them as gigs, with a 2-week window. That was extremely generous. I got it when we were still in Austria. Yeah, can you turn in this thing on the 13th? And I said, sure, I'll have like 2 weeks after we get back. That's important, but it's not urgent. So there's, put that over there. If it's not important, but it's urgent, those might be the tasks that must get done but don't require your specific skill set. Sarah has a student aid. Unfortunately, I'm like a one-man show, so that doesn't really apply to me, except if there's a law or something that I really don't grasp. I mean, it would be stupid for me to try to create the wheel from scratch and be looking through German law books rather than just asking someone who's a lawyer in Germany and saying, hey, what's this mean? Quickly delegate that to them. I guess I'd leave that. If it's not important and it's not urgent, well, then maybe we don't do it. And this can go, and that's the end of my written out talk, but I've really benefited a lot from kind of thinking this way. Even washing dishes, like sometimes I'll think, okay, there's a pile of dishes on the table, there's some dishes over here. I'm going to translate for 30 minutes or an hour, and then I'll come back and do all the dishes. That way I'll have them all at once, and I can do them, and it requires the same kind of skills rather than getting them and then moving and then coming back. So it can be something personal, in your personal life as well as your professional life, and it requires the ability to say, okay, I'm going to worry about that. I mean, for me, and for a lot of careers, AI is a huge threat. ChatGPT is a huge threat. That's all people talk about on LinkedIn. Are we going to be replaced? They're talking about replacing actors now with AI. I mean, I don't know how, but for everything. And mine's one of the jobs that really is right in line to be done by AI technology. Am I worrying about my career coming to an end? Well, I mean, it might, but if I'm worried about that all the time, I'd have a miserable life. So it's a possibility, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. If I go for, like, what's my objective criteria? If I go for most of the year and can't make enough to make a living, then I'll think about it. But, you know, just delay that to another time. So I've got to do it, but not now has been a huge help. That's all I have, and I don't have a fancy ending. So I appreciate you letting me talk to you today. Thank you.